Welcome to Hellbilly, the darker side of Appalachia. Just a friendly reminder not to whistle, sing, or scream into the darkness, because you might find yourself surrounded by skinwalkers or someone who might be there to steal your catalytic converter or some copper wire. Either way, it won't be pleasant. Tonight, I have a very special guest with me, Justin Anderson, who has been working, as I mentioned, on helping others find a way to express emotion more appropriately or accurately with therapists and with themselves. It's a very intricate and nuanced way that he built around a lore that he created. And rather than try to explain it because it is incredibly intricate, I'm going to turn it over to Justin. But also, I'd like to, before that, say welcome. Thank you, Justin, for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Kelly.
Start wherever you want to. What brought you here? What led you to creating this?
All right. Well, one of the things that drew me to your show was in your pod match, you were talking about the use of folklore and the use of stories
Mm.
in mental health. And to me, that was extremely interesting because it's a little different from what I typically see when people talk about mental health. A lot of times I kind of started thinking about how mental health is taught to people. And a lot of times it's almost like learning a new language. So you understand, I feel sad, I feel bad. But when you go to talk with a therapist, it's like learning a new language because you find out, well, you're not just sad, you're depressed, or you may have bipolar disorder or something. And a lot of people, I think, have a little bit of trouble understanding those lines because it's almost like I came in here with just feeling sad, but now I have a word that carries a stigma attached to me because if I go tell someone I'm having a bad day, they're just like, oh, better days will come or it's not always raining. But if I tell someone, well, I have depression or I have bipolar disorder, then it becomes okay. So you have a mental illness, and then the questions, the negativity, or some people may start the whispering, and it carries a whole different feel. So the fact that you were talking about stories, folklore, and different ways of reaching your clients was really intriguing to me because that's what I built, not setting out to build. It started where this was actually supposed to be just kind of a side hustle type project. I was doing a lot of listening to audiobooks, and a lot of the audiobooks I heard on the app I was listening to simply were kind of the same beats. It was character get a secret item or somehow they get kind of overpowered and they're secretly the strongest and they just completely dominate everything while staying hidden in the background. And I was like, well, I spent a lot of time in my life writing. I enjoy it. This is something I can do. I sat down and I was like, okay, well, I'll write this story, 4 friends, 4 magical swords, go kill the demon king, and everyone lived happily ever after. Figure it would be short, sweet, to the point, and could get a little extra money. But that didn't happen. I sat down, I started writing, and as I started writing, things that I thought I processed, grief that I thought I let go of, because a lot of times, especially I know for males, we're not allowed to be vulnerable. We're not supposed to be emotional in our feelings. We're supposed to be tough all the time. And then, depending on who you talk to, how you handle grief is told to you differently. Some people mention you're supposed to cut grief off, and if you lose someone, you'll just see them at some point in time later on. There's not this lasting connection or this conversation around whether there's a connection still there or not. I thought I got rid of the grief of my grandmother passing from cancer. I thought I was being a man by the stereotypical standards. And during that writing, all of this came out. And I realized for 18 years, I've been carrying grief, trauma that I just suppressed. And writing allowed me to externalize it without realizing it.
Mhm.
And that was the start of all of this. As I was writing my characters, I noticed that my characters started to take shape of characters with actual emotional death and mental death. Some of them develop, actually, all my characters have a form of mental illness. One of them had PTSD, the other had survivor's guilt, another one has abandonment issues, and I found the main character kind of resembling me. He's very good at handling other people's emotions and feeling strongly for others, but really bad at monitoring his own emotions. And this is kind of where the story, I won't say just the story, the world began. I started reflecting over my own loss of my grandmother. She was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer when I was in 10th grade. It was a really hard time for me because, again, as a male, I was told I wasn't supposed to be vulnerable. This was my very first real close to home death. I had other family members that passed away, but no one that I grew up with, like every day I'm seeing, every day I'm spending time with. I learned that's hard to deal with. That's hard to process, not just for me, for my mother. My sister, being a nurse, she understood the prognosis. She understood the dynamics of the family that my mother wouldn't have a lot of help. So my sister focus became working to put back money to help bury my grandmother. But from my perspective, it looked like she didn't care. It's interesting as you get older, you kind of reflect and you can see different things. But during that time, I was just like, she don't care. I was angry at my sister. I was angry at the world, angry at just everything. I was angry that I couldn't fix my grandmother either.
Right.
And all of this led me to realizing back then, while there were options for therapy, I wasn't ready for that. The change in, as I stated earlier, language, I wasn't ready for. I also wasn't ready for peer support groups because, again, that had you admitting and being open with, I would like to say, the I in grief, because in grief you normally are saying I feel this, I handle this way, I'm sad. It's a lot of I in being able to admit the I, but I wasn't ready to say I am at the point, 16-year-old who realizing my grandmother's going to die. I wasn't the best in school, so she's wondering if I'm going to graduate even. She will more than likely not make it to see me graduate. I wasn't ready for putting myself as the center of all of that. I didn't seek support groups. I didn't seek therapy. I also lost my ability to write poetry, songs, write in general back then. I went through a writer block phase when dealing with all of that. So this brought me to, as I started writing this novel and all of this started coming out, I decided to build a universe for the very things that I wish existed back when I needed it. I wanted a world that I didn't feel judged for saying that I'm going through some traumatic moments, some trauma. I didn't want to feel judged for being vulnerable as a male, being emotional. I didn't want to feel judged for being in my grief for extended periods of time and not just getting over it because some people feel like you should.
Right.
And this is where Valoran verse came from.
You bring up some really good points, specifically that our society has these spoken and unspoken norms for men about how they're supposed to process emotions. In a very subconscious, it seems like, way, your brain was like, no, we're going to process this. And this is how we're going to do it. Your universe, your entire lore, your canon was created.
Correct.
Um, were you in therapy when this was going on?
No, I did try therapy before that. And the odd part about it is that one thing I would like to say for those who are opposed to therapy, therapy is very much like finding the right outfit or dating, however you want to look at it. It takes time to find someone who you feel you click with. And there could be various reasons why you and a therapist don't actually get along, not in a negative way, but they just may not be the person that you feel like pushes you to rebuild and grow. It's okay to find a new therapist. It's not like they're going to be offended, or at least I say most wouldn't. But
No,
uh,
that's true.
in the first therapist I had, I just felt like, from my personal level, we were doing CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. I do agree with the things she said, but I also felt very much that she was too agreeing with me. I don't know whether that was just the way that my mind processed things or if maybe she really was, but it really made it hard to feel like I was making any progress because I felt like when I was telling her things as if I couldn't be wrong within whatever I'm telling her. Now, during that time, the subject matter was different, and maybe that's why. But for me, the way that I process things, number one, I overthink a lot. I was going through and I'm like, okay, I'm telling her this and I'm not wanting her just to say the opposite, whatever I'm saying. But I guess I always felt like there would be more pushback, like, okay, why did you do that? Why did you feel like that? I felt like it was just too agreeing with the way that I move. I can't always be right. That didn't feel good for me. So I spent some time without a therapist and then I started writing again. I did start therapy back and ironically, it was because of the writing, not because of just the trauma
Okay.
that came back, but I've been writing for 20 plus years. I've never taken a actual writing course. I don't read actual writing books. I do read a lot of manga, a lot of anime. I consume a lot of different media, but as far as like reading, this is how you write by some kind of author, it just has never been my cup of tea. I did not know the writing world was so toxic. It was a
Really?
very, very tough lesson to learn because I was looking for writing groups and I was like, okay, I can join a writing group, write with people, kumbaya, everything will be happy. Well, I learned a lot over this. Realistically, as this doesn't seem like this would probably be condensed to this point, but everything I built, learned, happened over the span of about 8, 9 months. This isn't a 20-year project per se. I just needed to get all of this out. It's been very loaded, but my mind really needed to get a lot of this out. So when I was in this writing group, they were trying to figure out what type of writer I was. There's plotter, planners, which are like the same thing. And then there's pantsers. Plotters are people who plan out like every beat, every scene. They know what's going to happen each chapter, what character is going to do before they start writing. Well, that wasn't me. And then a pantser is someone who kind of knows like a lighthouse in the distance for the boat. They know where the lighthouse is or the North Star, but they kind of don't really know what's going to happen between there. They just know the end point. I need to reach that. And however you reach it is just kind of being figured out. And I was closer to a pantser, but I wasn't quite that either. What I consider my writing now is close to being like a method actor, the actor that tell you that they get so immersed in the roles that they become these characters to the point where some of them do need therapy to basically go back to being themselves. That's similar to how I write. It's more like embodying the characters I'm writing about, watching the world through their eyes, through their views, their actions, as if I'm them, and then reporting back what happened, as opposed to thinking about it and I want this character to do this. I'm more just telling you what the character actually has done while I was watching this almost like a movie. It is very heavy from a mental standpoint. Since some of my characters do go through trauma, I have to have a release afterwards. I need to sit back and decompress because if I don't, it will affect my depression. It affects my mood. It affects my ability to go to my actual day job and interact with people. So trying to again learn the language of the writing world while being a part of this group, and not knowing it led to a very nasty interaction. A lot of them were like, how many books do you read? Oh, if you don't read this author, you don't read this book, or you don't read this, then I would never read your work as an author because you couldn't possibly write good. And it was like really nasty, very dog palish like.
Really?
And yes, it was horrible. And
Wow.
it really, really caught me off guard to the point where it kind of tore into me. And this is where I realized I had unresolved childhood trauma because that triggered it. And that made me seek therapy for the second time that I'm still currently in. I grew up as a minority, a one of two where I live. I spent a lot of time where the concept of fighting is an option, those types of things, where my option was to come home beat up, clothes ripped every day, or to fight back. My childhood, for up until I was about 12, felt very lonely. I had about two friends and one adult that they were amazing people that actually believed I was a good kid, that I was just a kid. Everybody else, ended up blamed for a lot of things that would happen within the neighborhood. Even days I never went outside, I would have police knocking on my door questioning what I've done. So being kind of ostracized within a neighborhood, it's a really tough thing as a child. I never realized until later that I normalized it. I just kind of was like, this is just how things are. And it became, I normalized it to, I think, cope with it. I've always kind of processed things differently. I realized as I've grown up, I've never been a partier. I've never been a drinker, smoker. I never wanted my cognitive ability to be inhibited in any type of way. So I didn't really get along too well with people my age because they wanted to party. They wanted to talk about drugs, women, the typical thing that you see on TV that's pushed. And
Mhm.
that was never where my mind was. I had a hard time associating with people my age, but then when talking with people older, I could fit in conversation wise. But if I said anything that was in disagreement with what they said, then it would be, you're too young to understand, or you just being rebellious because you haven't lived enough. I never felt a place where I felt like I could be really understood. I was expecting to find that amongst other writers, considering, like I said, I've been writing for years. And when it didn't happen, and I got that type of reaction, it triggered those past traumas that I just kind of pushed to the side. It caused me to spiral. I went through some really like, okay, I don't want to write. I should have never did this, and a lot of negative thoughts. And I was like, okay, I need to get into some kind of therapy because I'm older now. I have at the time, my oldest was 16. And my youngest was 4. And I was like, I got people who I need to take care of. I can't have these type of thoughts, and I can't bring this into the home. So I did get back into therapy, and I found the therapist I really do like. It's helped me to start using my writing to externalize things more. Once I kind of got myself back settled, I started putting out a lot of folklore and doing a lot of things to help myself heal, but also to acknowledge other people who felt alone like I did. For
Right.
people who didn't fit in, who were judged, who may have been looked at, and they don't feel like nobody really quite understands them. This is where the bulk of my work really began to take off. And what I kind of realized, I don't know if this was coping or not. I realized that I do a really good job of being a vessel for other people's feelings, taking other people's feelings in and turning it into something that's external for them to view. I use the term more witnessing because I think that's the appropriate way to look at it. A lot of times as humans, when someone tells you their problems, our number one reaction in human nature is to want to fix it. You want to help, you want to give advice, you want to help them overcome it, fix it. That's not always what people want. It's a really hard thing to do to sit and listen to someone and not try to fix them, to not try to fix their problem, to just say, I am here with you. I'm not going to fix you, but I do hear what you're saying. I see you as a person. I see you are carrying this particular burden or this grief, and sit within that. Honestly, it's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to watch somebody hurt and actively and consciously not do anything to attempt to fix it. For most people, it's something that it's so uncomfortable that they really can't do it. And it creates situations where they want to leave or try to change the subject. And then that person closes off again because they feel like they can't be open because it creates this uncomfortable atmosphere. I, for whatever reason, tend to handle that well. And that's what I started turning into a lot of my folklore. Some of it involves me, others involve things that I seen as people who deal with invisible weight on different occupations, like firefighters. I have a piece called Burning Guilt, which was from the point of a civilian. There was a Alabama civilian who saved 12 people from a burning complex by
Mhm.
himself. I could be completely wrong, but when watching it, it was really interesting to watch how society, we focus on the happy part of it because they're like, all by yourself, you saved 12 people. He was like, yeah, he had to knock on the door. Some of them wanted to go back in and get their phones. But unfortunately, there was three that he couldn't get to before the fire became too fierce. If you watch the video, I don't know if he realizes he was doing it or not, but he returns to these three people about 4 to 5 times throughout that video. He talks about the 12 he saved, and he's like, there was three people I couldn't get to. I couldn't save them. And then the reporter and people around are like, yeah, but you saved so many. He was like, yeah. And I did it all by myself too. But then he comes back and he's like, but if I would have had a better jacket, I would have got those three. And then they continue, and again, he comes back, but if I had a better jacket, I would have got those three. And to me, that spoke real volumes in
Yeah, for
survivor's
real.
guilt. I wrote a piece, like I said, burning guilt from that standpoint, but this is what firefighters deal with on a daily basis or consistent basis of it's not about the ones I saved, but the ones I couldn't. And a lot of people don't look at it that way. That number of 12, 15, 18 people you save pairs in comparison to one or two that you miss saving. I think those types of invisible weights are what I'm looking to bring out and address publicly for other people to acknowledge it because it's hard to say it yourself. Again, it's hard to put that I in grief and talk about it yourself. And for some of these occupations, speaking about the weight of your mental health on the job could get you benched, could get you fired, could get you in trouble.
Yep.
Um, so they bottle it up. They use dark humor. They use other ways to cope. There statistically is a alcohol problem amongst firefighters. I did not know until I started this that firefighters have a higher suicide rate than police officers who are out there dealing with gunshots and firefights and things. Female firefighters, which still is within firefighters, but it's different. While they don't have as high of a suicide rate as males, they have a higher PTSD rate. Learning all of this has been really impactful in the way that I'm looking at it, in the way that I feel maybe I could help by writing folklore and writing things that see them. It became a case of telling someone, I see what you're dealing with. I witnessed you being this, and you do have someone who cares. I've received some actual positive feedback from firefighters that it did feel like it made a difference for them because they're not allowed to express that type of truth. And to know someone It's not pretending to be a firefighter, not pretending to just understand, but saying, I'm not one of you. I don't carry this, but I see that you are carrying this. Seem like it makes a difference to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, empathy is a really important thing and it goes a long way. Just being able to be with someone and see them and hear them and just sitting with them and their struggles is very impactful. Am I right in that it has been informed by narrative therapy?
Yes, it was interesting because I wrote all of this. Now, my mother, she was a case manager for a mental health center for 30 plus years. And the one thing she taught me, because when I was younger, I made the same mistake in media, whether it's cartoon, games, movies, books, all of it, the perception of mental illness in those with mental illness is very, very wrong. I remember this to this day. I was a competitive person and I had a friend who, one of the few friends I had, we had a spat because his cousin was autistic. Now, growing up back in the 90s where mental illness was depicted as virtually non-functioning, pretty much straitjacket drooling, the whole real stereotype. I did not want him on my team because I did not want to lose. And this created, understandably, an issue between me and my friend. My mother set me down and told me, number one, I was wrong, why I was wrong, and this was before I ever met the boy. He was a darn good kickball player, number one. So
Right
I
on.
was completely, I was completely wrong. But that conversation with my mother, and she made me go apologize. Number one, fix that friendship. But it also made me reevaluate how judging someone fast can do a lot of damage.
Mhm.
Uh, And the thing that she told me was she pointed to a client of hers and was like, what do you think about this person? And I'm like, well, it's just a person. They're doing normal stuff. And she was like, what would you say if I told you they had a mental illness? I was like, well, they're not like what I seen on TV. So no. She was like, you can't tell the difference. If they don't tell you in a lot of cases, and if they're, whether it's through medication, through therapy, through learning to self-soothe, you really can't tell the difference. And a lot of people assume that they can just point them out because of the way that media has showed mental illness to work and the way media has used mental illness to just move plots. One of my favorite movies, Taken, I love it, but it does such a poor job with mental health because the daughter got kidnapped, almost
Mhm.
sold into sex trafficking, was put on drugs. I think her friend died. Actually, she was kidnapped twice.
Mhm.
And by the end of the movie, she's just smiling. There's no work shown that this left any type of scars, any type of mental markings, trauma, or anything on her. It's just, I went through all this. My dad is this really cool guy. He saved me twice, and my life is perfect. And it's like, that's not how mental health works. No.
Exactly. So no. Flash forward 6 months from now.
That led to when I started doing the folklore and started working on the novel and everything. That was a North Star for me. I did not want my work to resemble just mental health to move the plot forward. And I did not realize how much I absorbed from my mother's teachings, her interactions, the way she talked about her clients. Some of them were like little kids and they were excited when she started a collection to throw them a Thanksgiving dinner where others didn't. She took the time and they would pitch in, they would assist, they would want to help and be excited to help. All of those teachings that she told me, I didn't realize how much I absorbed and it reflected in my work. So when I started doing this and I reached out to a narrative therapist because I wanted to look at like, could this eventually become some kind of community project? I was shocked as much as she was to see that my work aligned with narrative therapy with my terms like the fact that I use hollow to represent grief and trauma or negative emotions, while lucent represents positive emotions. In my story, the thread is your soul, or in narrative therapy, your core self. In my story, the thread represents yourself, your mental health. So if you are dealing with survivor's guilt, suppressing it is harmful in any capacity. So my story works that way. If you're dealing with survivor's guilt and you're suppressing it and it's eating you alive, your thread begins to fray, it begins to hollow, and this has a negative impact on you with the, I don't really want to call them monsters of my world, but for a lack of better term for explaining it, the hollowborn are like the monsters of the world. They really are just grief manifested
Mhm.
because it has nowhere to go. So it bleeds back into the world as hollowborn, and their destructive presence is just a side effect of them being a manifestation of grief. So you're suppressing grief, or you're suppressing survivor's guilt and things of that, begins to hollow your thread, and it makes you more susceptible to that manifestation of grief that's walking around the world. Although if you're learning to process it, it doesn't have to, in the world, it's not like they're just sitting down with a therapist, but they are coming to an understanding of, this wasn't necessarily my fault. Without giving too much of the story away, it wasn't my fault. Speaking with other people about it, having peer support, this improves your thread. It helps to restore your thread, and it helps to strengthen your thread. And that provides, from a mental health standpoint, resistance against the hollowborn, in a way, against their mental attacks and things. And I didn't realize how much at the time this aligns with like narrative therapy, the core self, the reauthoring,
Mm.
and those types of terms. They were like, did you know narrative therapy before this? Did you write this within mind? I was like, no, I just was writing it, and I didn't know either at all. This is where the whole learning that my whole world kind of aligns with narrative therapy. And the more I've searched, it aligns, I believe, very well with IFS as well.
Yes, it does, actually. It really does. Parts work, 100%. I just the stuff that you've shared with me, I'm very impressed by it, and think that it is incredibly useful and will be a useful thing if it's something that you, once you are finished developing and fine-tuning it, decide to release into the world.
Definitely something I want to release. It again, it became something, like I said, these are the things that I wish I had. It also has became kind of a version of a mission for myself because, like I said, I was taught by my mom, and I was receptive to her explaining to me how mental illness worked. But I do know that some people aren't. So my goal with the novel is to, the way that I would describe it, it would be like world building is the body. So you can really dig in. There's a lot of lore, there's a lot of things to learn. Mental health would be like the underclothes, and they're there, but they're hidden by the fact that dark fantasy is the outfit. So if you were to read it, you would see the mental health comparison. You'll be like, well, this person has PTSD. This person has this. You would be able to see the dual layer.
Mhm.
But for people who aren't quite interested, or they don't know about mental health, they're reading it just as a straight dark fantasy. It's just cool magic, cool monsters. And this opens up the door for a different conversation, because when you talk about this book and when you talk about this work, it's from a whole different angle, and it allows people to have this same conversation and learn about it without realizing that they're learning, this is how someone really functions when they have this particular mental illness. And it allows for those with that particular mental illness to point to something and externalize without having to out themselves if they're not ready yet. They can say, hey, did you read about this character? Yeah. Did you see how they would only touch certain things with their left hand? Well, yeah, I just, did you not know that's how PTSD worked? Because this person did something. Now they have this trauma, and they're viewing that other hand almost, in order to cope, as a separation of themselves. And they're not actually using it. Those small little things is what make it realistic and what makes it helpful for those people who are experiencing it. I'm hoping this will allow more people to bridge a therapy gap because if I'm not ready to say again, I can point to this person, be like, hey, so in the novel, Vincent is a character with this and that, and tell you about this character without telling you that this is me, but you can gather enough from the character symptoms to understand, okay, this is what you're going through, and this is what you're dealing with. This has kind of became my goal with the different things that I've started to build. Again, this wasn't the original path, but I'm very happy to be on it. And I've showed you a couple of the tools, one being a thread weave, which will take lore from my world. So Hollowborn, or in my world, the cloak figure is a representation of trauma. It can take that information as opposed to you saying, I have traumatic past, or, I'm feeling sad, depressed. You could say I'm feel hollow. It allows for the client to use lore terms to externalize or distance themselves from the trauma, from their problems, and you can translate it within different therapy frameworks such as CBT, IFS, narrative therapy, ACT. Now, some it aligns with a lot more smoothly than others, but I was able to get an idea going. And this is where, for me going forward, I do need actual therapists to fine tune this. Because while I can look and I can find connections, I want it to be correct. For now, as a demo to show therapists, I can get it to show where it can take my lore and translate it into those frameworks. And the other portion was a dual state journal that functions for a client and a therapist in the manner of helping you to track the slight changes in language. So a lot of times we don't realize, unless you really know someone, you don't catch the slight word shifts in their language as negativity comes up. It can go from, well, I couldn't do that, to, well, I would never be able to do that. That never, that single word is a
Mhm.
real big change in their mindset mentally. A lot of people would just kind of miss it because it just flows so naturally. But it is very important at letting you know that, okay, this person may have been at a 5, now they're at a 8 or a 9. This is
Yes.
getting more serious. And within this, it tracks the hollow versus solution terms. And this goes back to kind of where I feel, depending on the wording that's used, there's certain stigmas attached. If I was to say good or bad, immediately you're classifying things. This is not good, so I don't want the bad. And you're acknowledging everything you write. You're looking at it and you're processing it. Okay, this has got a lot of bad in it. My therapist is going to think this. Now you're
Yes.
starting to try to filter yourself and try to monitor yourself, and this doesn't help your therapist and it doesn't help you. Um,
Exactly.
Changing the terms to hollow, to lucent, to different terms that don't fit cleanly within that stigma, I feel can be a good way to help. It's a good way to see, okay, the beginning of January, I had 3 hollow words throughout this journal. By the middle, it was about 15. By the end, it was 3. What happened in the middle of this that made me have negative emotions? You
Mhm.
read the journal, you look at the words. Oh, okay. My grandmother's passing was around then.
Right.
Now I'm starting to notice this pattern. Okay, around her birthday, around holidays, my hollow words increase. Now there's something that can be had from that. And the therapist can look at that and ask and have questions around that. So within that, I started it and then I thought about it again. I think a lot and I like process almost in real time. It's kind of hard for me sometimes to keep up because I'll tell you something and then it's like, oh, and 10 minutes later, I done thought about 7 ways to try to make that better. So it's short lived. Uh, Within that, the original version, I think when I showed you,
Yeah.
was just doing the hollow to lucid. Since then, you can do what I call self thread or sanctum. So, sanctum again is a community view of something as opposed to saying assisted help or therapy, which has already stigmas around it to most
Mhm.
people. Sanctum is a community, and I feel personally, and this is in my opinion, I feel like the term comes across more friendly, more acceptable to say, okay, this is just a community and it's not me having therapy, or it's just kind of tricking your mind a little bit. And what it allows is you can write within my lore terms and then export it out to your therapist within whatever frameworks they work within. I think number one, that could be helpful to people on a couple of different levels. Hunting for therapists is similar to finding the right team. So maybe you don't work well with a narrative therapist. Well, then you go to a therapist that's specialized in CBT. Now you're explaining everything all over again. And
Yeesh.
then
Yeah.
maybe you don't get along with that therapist. So now you found a different therapist. Well, maybe they deal with IFS and you're explaining everything again. I think sometimes for people that is tiring because it's like nobody's getting me. And I have to retell this story that I'm not ready to handle yet. I need to tell it and work with a therapist to handle, but I'm not getting that help because I'm not connecting with these therapists. Where in this case, I could write this journal for a whole month and I could give it to a narrative therapist and it's exported out in narrative therapy terms. Again, this isn't clinically validated.
Mhm.
I'm looking for that type of partnership, but from what I've been able to find myself, it aligns. And okay, they didn't work. Well, I can take that same journal, export it out in IFS, CBT, ACT, and they can read that same work to understand my whole month, even if I added new ones, and review that without me having to retell this same story over and over and over. Maybe sometimes my wording changed and I forgot certain things. It's hard to, as a therapist, number one, to understand who the person is, where they come from, why this happened, what is going on with them, and try to do all of this and find them at a point to where when you stop, they're at a point where they're okay mentally within like an hour.
Oh,
uh,
yeah. No, you're not kidding. It is hard. And a lot of what you're saying is honestly stuff that I talk with my clients about constantly. Value judgments, throw them out the door. Good, bad, right, wrong, all of those things. Let's take those off the table because when we align ourselves with those things, we align ourselves with all or nothing thinking, stigmas, things
yep.
like that, and our we prime our brains to think a certain way. So you are spot on changing the language and giving your brain a break to think in ways that are safer, that feel less heavy, that feel easier to describe. I think that what you're doing is something that could be a really valid tool for people to approach therapy. A lot of people come into therapy, and I just encourage people if you're not a journaler, that's fine. But if you are, journal, and if you're okay with it, share it with me because that'll give me a better picture without you having to, like, word vomit all of the stuff that you don't wanna word vomit to me, or just hand it to me, or I'm remote, so just email it to me or put it in the messenger. The journal that you have mentioned and that you shared with me is a really good tool because then it would show me I played with it and it's really great. It would show me what's going on in different formats and whatever the person wants to use or whatever the therapist is using. It would take a lot of pressure off of the person to
I
feel
agree.
like, "Hey, I have to relive this again with a new person." And while exposure therapy requires that you do that over and over and over again, it's not always fun when you're trying on new therapists. I really can't say enough, having played around with the stuff that you've shared with me, about how I think that this is going to be something that could be very useful for people as a therapeutic tool to share with their therapists. I endorse it. I am 100% behind it. I've had clients, Justin, who have come to me with
characters from their novels and been like, there's this character in this novel, or there's parables, or they're myths, and this is how it feels. That's how they explain themselves because that's the only way they know how. And what you're
Yes,
doing is taking it a step further and saying, okay, here is this program now that allows you to not only explain it, but type it in and get feedback that you can now present and share.
that's what I was hoping for. And what I realized is, even with myself, like I said, as you can see, I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of folklore, a lot of creating, which has been useful to my therapist in seeing the way that I process, the way that I think. But I will be honest, the platform I use, because I'm supposed to journal, I hate it. I hate it.
I'm not a
It,
journaler either, man.
it's really just, it's funny because I got I don't even know how many folklore, well over 20. And I haven't even put all of them up on my website yet because I try to make them interactive and make sure that they're impactful to people. So I do, in essence, journal. It's a mindset shift going into the program to journal. I would liken it to if you were to walk in the mud and then walk outside, everything is already kind of dirty. So you don't really realize or think about tracking that dirt across the grass.
That's fair.
When you come into the house, and this would be kind of like stepping into the journaling app, it's like everything is clean and sanitary. So now every piece of dirt I'm tracking, I'm looking at it and I'm assessing it. Well, what is my therapist going to think when I say I was mad at my child? Because now I'm also taking and I'm pulling societal expectations in. In this moment, I may be extremely angry at my child and I may say, "Oh, I hate my child." Do I really hate them? No. But society, if I said I hate my child, that carries a completely different connotation.
Yeah.
Now I'm judging my therapist with that same lens. So do I want to really say that I was angry enough to say I hate my child? No. I'll say I didn't like, no, you made me angry. That's better. They're going to look at me better. They're not going to judge me in this type of way. You begin to try to clean up that dirt you tracked into that therapy session before the therapist can even look at it and say, hey, it's okay to feel that way.
Yes.
And that's where I think when doing the journal for me, it feels like I'm going to work, like I'm doing work. I know it's helpful for my therapist, so I do force myself to do it. But then the questions after makes it feel more work and more clinical, where it's like, well, how many times have you been sad within this week, or you felt like this? And it's like now I really do feel like I'm being
Ooh.
diagnosed and it becomes hard to do. So, but my folklore tells my therapist and my writing tells her just as much, if not more, how I function
Mhm.
without me having to go through feeling like I need to sanitize my writing or clean myself up to look presentable to another person. And that's where I'm hoping to kind of bridge that gap. A lot of people, if you think about it, they'll hop on a phone call or they'll send like a 10-page text to a friend of how horrible this week has been or this month has been. If you were to ask them as a therapist about the month, they can only tell you maybe two things or feel like they can only say two things to you where their friend got all this other stuff that would have helped you so tremendously.
Yeah. You're right. As we close up for tonight, if people want to follow along and keep updated on your work, how would they do that? How do they keep up
Uh,
with you?
so the best way would be my website. So ValorinVerse.com. That's my website, and that's gonna have basically the most refined version of everything that I can do. The folklore, I'm trying to get as many as I can voiced by voice actors.
Oh, cool.
So there are some that are voiced, and I feel it adds a different depth. A lot of the folklore have interactive features, so there's movement, or some of them will kind of have certain effects to bring what is being said on screen to life, to let you kind of experience it more, immerse yourself within it, and also may help people understand what it's like to be you. There's also a memorial wall for those who have lost loved ones, pets, service members, children, that they can memorialize a loved one on there.
That's really
That
great.
that have been something that I've used myself because what I learned with my grandmother when she passed, mentally, I couldn't bear it well when I kept it internal. For me, I ended up getting 2 tattoos because I needed that physical representation. Now, tattoos isn't for everybody, but for some people, having an object, having some kind of physical thing outside of themselves can help them process it. The way that I talk about it is having this on the wall and it's synonymous. I don't know who you are or anything when you do it. I just know the name you put in, the message you put to that person. It's a way of allowing not only yourself to honor that person, but for others to honor them as well. The other portion I thought about for soldiers or family members who unfortunately may have lost someone that they couldn't bury or couldn't retrieve the body. This is a way of still remembering them and having other people remember, or people who may have lost all their family members. So they are the only ones left. Again, that type of thing. I also have Whispers of the Veil, which is a negative release space where people can type in a negative thought. If you're having a horrible week and you feel like nobody understands you, you can come there, you can type it in, you can release it. And what it does, it allows for your thought to be in there and for you to see other people who's having a hard time. And the concept is to know that you aren't alone, even when you are at your lowest, and I'm gonna use a concept that a mentor of mine, Natasha, used. You're parallel with someone a lot of times and never realize it. You know, you're really having a tough time and you're like, I'm in this alone. Nobody else understands. But if you honestly look to your left or your right, you're standing right next to other people having just as bad of a time as you. There's a lot of things that I've been building for people to kind of understand themselves. Again, a lot of the folklore has special features. There's one about people with dementia and Alzheimer's where the caregivers are able to leave a message and you can read their memories of this person, because mourning someone who's living is different than mourning someone who's passed. You're mourning the loss of something that will never be. You're mourning the version of this person that you will never get to see while this person is still living. That's a lot harder because it's not a closed chapter. You're watching this happen and you're like, we were supposed to be going out, partying or celebrating, having kids running around. You're mourning this version that you dreamed of that you know will never be. That's a whole different topic to work through with a therapist and work through compared to other things. So VaelorinVerse.com would be the best way to stay up on the most current things that I'm building and releasing. I do have social media at JVaelorin. I have pretty much all social media, so you'll see things I post on TikTok. I recently did, for the Mental Health Month, I did a 14-piece, but 13 voice actors that I hired. It was
That's
hard,
cool.
kind of. 13 different voice actors, and they were in basically the voice of inner critics. I know this has been a long podcast, but I'll keep this part short. I seen on TikTok this video. I won't give a whole bunch of details, but in short, it was a child having fun being a child, roughly about 6, had a disability. The way that grown-ups were treating that child was horrible. They were saying this child would never go pro in basketball, that he's making this unfair or unfun for the normal kids. All of these just nasty things on this happy moment. And the mother was amazing with so much grace. She never cussed anybody out, never said anything rude, but she answered every last comment of why the child didn't play soccer versus basketball, even with the disability, that he's not looking to go pro, he's just having fun. But
Yeah.
as I read her comments from top to bottom, even though her wording never lessened or anything, it wasn't like her sentences were getting shorter or anything. I felt like you could read the exhaustion in her words of fighting against so many people attacking her child. And this led to me thinking when I put my phone down, what if this child 2 years, 4 years, 10 years from now was to read this post somehow? What would he think about himself? And it started a folklore called What the World Calls It. It walks through the 12 sanctums in my world, and each sanctum kind of embodies a different belief and truth. JVaelorin is a war sanctum, so it goes back to that typical male vulnerability. You're not allowed to be weak. You're not allowed to be vulnerable. Umbrius believes in self-carrying self-grief. Like grief is a solo mission, and you don't involve others within your grief, but that also has negative effects and people break. Each sanctum believes different things, and you go through each sanctum and they're like a voice of inner critic, and Kelvorin is calling you weak, soft. Syzygy is calling you a glitch. And basically the whole process is going through this and realizing that someone said these things to you over your lifetime. They may have passed on, they may have changed the way they were, they may have forgotten about you the very next day. I won't spoil the end of it, but my work, I try to make sure, and this is about the only area that I kind of deviate from trying to be really close to how mental health therapists would do. I try to kind of meet people where they could be, because the one problem I had myself is when I look at mental health material and it's all happy or toxically positive, where the world needs you here and that. And that's positive for when people are in that space. But when I was at my darkest and lowest, you can miss me with that because I didn't feel the world needed me here.
Right.
That made me feel more broken, like the whole world. So why am I the only one that don't feel this way and can't be happy? And that I wanted to try to avoid. I wanted to let people be within my work and know that I'm sitting there with them, and you don't have to rush. If you need to sit here within this grief for longer, I can sit here with you. And then when you're ready to move, okay, then let's move.
Justin, I am really glad that you reached out to me. It has been an absolute pleasure getting to know you. The world needs more youth. It really does. Thank you for sharing your story and your work on the podcast. I am really hopeful that you get more followers, more interest, and that you keep in touch.
I will. And
Awesome.
thank you for having me.
I'd like to thank Justin Anderson for sitting with me a spell and talking about various types of stigma and mental health, including within treatment and diagnoses, as well as providing information on how he is working to address those using fiction, lore, and much, much more. That rhymes. Please tune in next time on Hellbilly when I will get the episodes out much quicker and for a conversation on another area of mental health in which there is much stigma where there shouldn't be, and if there weren't, we might have a lot more people still with us. That's cryptic. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, not stalk Justin's social media, and please remember to like, follow, subscribe, and not stalk mine too. I always keep forgetting to add that at the end of these, but I'm trying to make a point to do better. This has been a Strummer's Mom production. Thanks, Frank.